Right now, let's turn to the SONA Standing Committee and on Public Accounts, Chair and African People's Convention President Themba Godi joins us now to give us his views on what that State of the Nation should be about. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. First and foremost, I mean, we've been here before. By and large, I'm sure Sergeant at Arms is already getting ready, selecting some of the big, strong men that are going to be handling the situation, and it will be heavy security, heavy South African National Defence Force presence, and so on and so forth. There'll be an hour or two maybe of disruptions. Eventually, the President is somewhat going to deliver the State of the Nation address. So what is key for us is to really look at whether these do help. The President, this time around, he did something fantastic. He reviewed himself, so to speak, looked at SONA 2022 and publicized something called the State of the Nation 2022 Commitments 1 year review. And he breaks it down in a number of areas, which I think we must firstly deal with. Let's talk about this question of building consensus. This is something that he had promised in the previous State of the Nation address. He gave himself 100 days. I mean, clearly, it's now 365 days later. He has missed that particular target. He says social partners are still considering a draft social compact framework. Is this thing of a new consensus a complete fail?
Yeah, no, indeed, Brotabo. I think it was never going to fly, because if you look at the position of big business vis-a-vis the economy and the policies that are being pursued relative to the expectations of the workers, it was going to be difficult to bridge that gap, and there was no way he was going to move capital in the opposite direction. Yes, it was a good thing to have if it was possible, because then it would mean we are going to work on the basis of a minimum program that is agreed upon. But I think from where I was seated, it was never going to happen unless if Labour were to essentially give up on everything and agree on what has been the sole demand since 1994, that completely deregulate labor, allow employers to hire and fire at will. That was the only way you were going to get consensus, and I don't think that was going to happen.
So you're saying the only way we can have a common understanding of the challenges that we are having as a country in terms of unemployment, poverty and inequality is if either side, the side of the employees or the side of the employer, makes a move the opposite direction. And as it sits right now, there is no one who is willing to make that kind of compromise.
No, well, indeed, except that if there is to be movement, it has to be from the side of capital, because poverty, inequality, unemployment means that you have an over-accumulation of wealth in the hands of those who have. And that is where the role of the state comes in to mitigate and bring about these changes. So when you see the current government moving towards privatization of state assets, it actually moves us away from the ideal of equality, because then the state no longer has the mitigating powers to impact society and transform it in the interest of everybody. So from where I'm seated and how the president has conducted himself, I think he's moving full throttle in the privatization direction. Whoever thought that PRASA, the operation of trains, the operation of the Transnet Railway between Durban and Joburg could be privatized? But those are things that are with us now.
I wanted to come into that because then that is the next item on the agenda, growing the economy and jobs. I suppose you've already mentioned one of the issues that are cited here. President gives himself a green tick actually around those issues, meaning that these are issues that have been commenced and that have been completed. One green tick that he gives himself is bid window 6 capacity has been put in place. as in agreements that are in place. Of course, we are still awaiting that power, 5,200 megawatts. Is that a good thing, bid window 6 being in place?
You know, but our call is that we need to act in the national interest. And insofar as the issue around electricity is concerned, the president and his government have not acted in the national interest. And if you look at other countries where their national interests are at stake, they have acted contrary to publicly stated policy in order to save their nation. What we see with the IPPs is that they are being pushed dogmatically without any pragmatism in terms of ensuring that we have a base load that is stable, that is sufficient, so that as you increase renewables, you do so with a stable grid that in case of high demands, it can come in, you know, and save the situation. But what you have in our case is that close down the coal-fired power stations and just push for more IPPs. And yet we all know all over the world, whether you go to Germany, whether you go to Denmark, or whether you go to Australia, we don't as yet have the technology with which we can harness fully the generated electricity, if at all is generated. But if there is no sun, if there is no wind, then you have nothing being generated. So on that one of the IPPs, I think, yes, they have done it in the interests of those who stand to benefit, but it can't be said to be in the interest of the country, because as it is, we're all suffering from terrible, terrible load shedding never seen in the history of the country.
So let's look at another green tick that the president gives himself, is what you've already mentioned, initiated third-party access to the freight rail network. Others are saying that private sector has been calling for this for a while because SOEs are just failing to come on board. So you have companies that have got loads that they want to transport, and they end up taking these on the roads, which are damaging the roads, causing accidents, and so on and so forth. Is that a positive thing towards moving our economy to growth?
Well, look, Bratab, one of the major problems we've had since 1994 has been that capital has not reinvested into the productive economy. They have been hoarding profits in their, I think, over $1 trillion now that has not been used. So the lack of growth in the economy, it's not for lack of capital than the reluctance to invest. What you see as investments in your Transnet, in your PRASA, in your electricity generation, it's more about capital accessing areas of profit making than growing the economy. I mean, look, the last time I had a look at the books of PRASA as SCOPA chair, I mean, it was the biggest parastatal that was having billions upon billions of turnover. Why did it deteriorate? Same thing with Eskom. I mean, the last time we had Eskom, its energy availability factor around 2018 was almost 80%. But here we are, we're almost at 50%. Why this deterioration? The theory stands that when you have a policy to privatize, then you deliberately mismanage, let things fall apart so that you can justify privatization. I don't look at this as part of growing the economy than merely giving access to private capital to make profits from enclaves that have all along been in the hands of government.
Well, we're back live with you tonight on In Focus, and thanks for staying on. The State of the Nation Address 2022 under review. The African People's Convention President Themba Godi helping us with that conversation tonight as he looks back at what commitments the president has made. The president, I'm sure he will probably want to continue with this in his State of the Nation Address 2023. Because he seems to believe this is a commitment that he made, that he has kept, and which, in a sense, has brought into the country commitments to the value of 1.1 trillion rands to date. And that is the holding of this investment conference of some sort, showcasing what South Africa has available as far as those who want to come and invest in the country. Has this thing moved us forward? Is it moved us a needle? Or is it just another conference where, commitments are being made and people actually look back and say, okay, 1.1 trillion, where exactly is this 1.1 trillion? Is it beginning to translate in terms of people getting jobs, in terms of roads being built or bridges being built or infrastructure or firms being established?
I think, Bratabu, one of the things that have characterized the president, I think, has been a lot of doctoring of things. You see, when you hold an investment conference and people make pledges of billions and billions and whatever, it is then reported as if that money is already invested in the productive economy. Those are mere commitments. But then what happens after those commitments have been made? That is what is critical. And even if such investments have been made, the question that you're asking is the central issue. Has it translated into any job creation? Has it moved the needle? And the answer will be no, because as we all know, the statistics are pointing out that the rate of unemployment has shot up. Last year, the World Bank rated us as the most unequal country in the world. So if we're going to say, yes, this is what has happened, this is what I've done, I'm giving myself a green tick. Question is, what is the impact? I just want to steal from the wisdom of one of our great leaders, Robert Sobukwe, that we remember this man, who has said, our policies must flow from the logic of the African situation and in the long-term interest of the African people. So that's how we should look at these things. How are they impacting on the lives of ordinary people? If holding a conference was the objective, then fine, he has done it. But what is the impact? If it has no impact, then it really serves no purpose whatsoever. It's like whistling in the dark.
The big thing, of course, the big item that the president needs to really achieve, and many are saying would move his popularity stakes higher, besides the fact he needs to take care of the energy, it's the question of creating jobs. And if people would actually get employed, people would really do think he's ticking the right boxes. He says created 50,000 new work opportunities through the Social Employment Fund, created 50,000 opportunities for unemployed youth through the revitalized National Youth Service, placed 10,000 TVET graduates in workplace experience. If you count that, 110,000 kind of jobs that were created, yeah, and 1 million participating through work opportunities via the presidential employment stimulus. He gives himself a tick on these. Are these impactful enough?
Well, Bratabu, like I said, let's look at the stats of unemployment. Have they gone down or up? They've actually gone up. We're in a very, very serious crisis. And it's shameful that he would have the guts to tick himself blue on that one. And one interesting thing, Bratabu, is the use of job opportunities. It's no longer employment, it's job opportunities, meaning it is something that will be there for 3 months or 6 months and then it ends. The issue around quality jobs that the ANC came up with from Polokwane seem to have evaporated from their vocabulary. And yet we know in all elections since 1994, the one trump card of the ANC is jobs, jobs, jobs. And in between, very little happens. And we know even these so-called job opportunities, if you were to ask people on the ground, you'll find that they're done in a very partisan way, wherein if you're not a member of the party, it becomes very difficult for you to access them. They become means of patronage to manage and maintain certain people in particular areas. I think the issue of creating employment for our people, liberating the productive forces, that is allowing people to create work for themselves, it's what the president and the ANC generally has failed very, very hopelessly. And thus we see the rising stats of unemployment. And if you look at the way things are going, failure and deterioration in public management, it tells you that there is no plan and there is no ability to turn things around, where we should be aiming at least 10% unemployment, which is considered to be full employment. Instead, we're moving in the opposite direction. We have more of our people relying on social grants and the 350 rands, which tells you that a lot of people are out there without the dignity of work.
A big gaping hole exists when it comes to accelerating land reform. All you have, particularly here, that the expropriation bill is still to be approved now, is sitting with the NCOP. 140 small-scale farmers have received production input vouchers to date, but none of those ticks that we've seen in the other areas.
No, true. I think, and you'll note the cause of the rift that led to Sobukwe and others leaving was around the land question. And there is just no appetite to address it in a determined and focused way. You've seen the policy position of the ANC that now appeals to white farmers to donate land. And if that is the case, then we're waiting for Godot. And yet we have so many people who want to farm. Our economy, yes, it's manufacturing, it has also been financialized to some extent, but agriculture still plays a very, very critical role. And to the extent that the ANC government does not see that as an opportunity to create employment, ensure that people can work for themselves, can feed themselves, can only confirm the fact that the national interest is not being served. Yeah. And as you indicate, whatever little numbers that can be filled around, they don't move the needle. They don't move the needle at all.
So if you are the president and you are speaking to us on Thursday, I mean, and we are to take you seriously, particularly around the question of land reform, what do you need to be saying? For example, there's 14,000 hectares of public land from the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure that needs to be transferred to the Housing Development Agency. That matter is still to be finalized. It's a big hole that is left there. One would think it's a simple thing that is in the purview of this government to quickly facilitate and do.
Well, look, that's correct. I'm sitting here with some land claimants somewhere in the Eastern Cape whose farms are owned by Public Works, but they are now 5, 6, 7 years waiting for a response in terms of whether they can be given that land or not. I think on the issue of land, if I were to be addressing on Thursday, I would commit that number one, we'll pass legislation to ensure that it's one farmer, one farm. And two, regulate the size of farms so as to release land for all people who want to farm. How do we get beaten by, if you look at Zimbabwe vis-a-vis their agricultural sector, there is determination, there is clarity, there is focus. That's why Zimbabwe now is going to be exporting wheat, because the government there is focused. But yeah, I think the current government has not placed land reform or agrarian reforms or agriculture as a priority issue. It's almost like it's settled. White people are going to do the farming. We can do the tendering, the car washing, selling chicken and this and that. I'm not saying those are not important, but I'm just saying in the bigger scheme of things, how do we consume what we produce when we are an overwhelming majority in the country if we don't have access to land?
As a former SCOPA chair, I'm sure you'd be interested in this, and that is the fight against corruption. Lots has been said around the capacitation of the NPA and the finance intelligence sector to combat the complex cases of corruption and financial crime. We are talking, for example, now about the development of a framework that would see private sector putting some money, assisting with some of the investigations and the prosecutions. We've got the head of the investigative directorate now that has been appointed. Are these all steps in the right direction, barring, of course, our failure to protect whistleblowers at this particular point in time?
Well, I'm very, very much against private sector funding for the NPA and the investigative arms of the state, so as to avoid capture. You recall how Steinhoff put aside, I think, about 30 million to give the NPA to help it in its investigation of Steinhoff. Where has that led us to now? Literally nothing. It's a conflict of interest. The state should have enough resources, especially insofar as security and prosecutor-related matters are concerned. I do think that the hollowing of the state capacity at all levels, for me, is a lack of political will. But also because, we need to start by saying to the people in government, you don't have a democratic right to be corrupt. So I think we need to start there. You don't have a right to be corrupt. It is wrong because you are depriving poor people of the resources that should give them services. So we need, as Kwame Nkrumah said, to raise public discontent, public disdain against corruption, and for people to make decisions on who they give the right to public office on the basis of the extent to which they are ethical, the extent to which they are people-centered, and they do things in the interest of our people. So I would argue that the NPA, the Hawks, the judiciary, parliament, all these chains of oversight and responsibility must be functioning optimally, because if one of them is weak, the chain is as strong as its weakest point.
Themba Godi, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. The African People's Convention President, Themba Godi, there, joining us for a review of the commitments made by the President in 2022, and of course looking ahead at what he needs to say to the nation this week as he delivers the State of the Nation address.